Hello. In this video, we're going to cover several different types of plumbing connections, water supply connections, and so on, and also thread tape and Oetiker clamp, just various connections and adapters. So to get started, first one we're going to talk about is what's referred to as John Guest fittings. They're quick connect fittings. John Guest is a brand name of the quick connect fittings, but they basically just push in. So you use this rigid plastic line and basically just push it right in there, and that's all there is to it, nice and tight. To release, you push in on this gray little collar here, down, then pull the tubing at the same time, just like that. There are little tools, little fork tools that help you do that, to push it on this thing. And there are also little locking tabs that you can put right between here to keep that from popping out. I've never had to use those myself, but they are available. So this is a sort of an adapter fitting on a lot of equipment. It has the big 3/4 inch basically garden hose fitting. So this will go right onto the piece of equipment, and then the tubing just snaps right into that. The John Guest fittings also fit what's usually known as compression fitting. So this is just a brass fitting, and this is smooth right here, 3/8. This would just go right into there, just like that, and that would adapt you over to, this is a 3/8 flare fitting here. So we have a 3/8 flare connector right here. So, and this is a barb fitting here to connect to braided tubing right there. So you have this all connected and transformed from a garden hose fitting over to the barb fitting. A couple of different steps there. So this compression fitting, we'll talk about this next. If I can get this out of here. Compression fitting is just a flat tube, and copper is used with copper tubing. You have a compression sleeve right here, and that goes right over there and compresses down and basically squeezes around that tube and makes a seal. What makes the seal is this nut here. So we'll put the nut on first, then we'll put the collar in there, and then we'll tighten this down onto a fitting, and then that will squeeze that little collar and clamp it down and make a good seal. So I have an example here of, this is a nice little adapter. If you notice under a sink, it has the valve with the tube that goes from the valve up to the sink. This is a sort of a T to get in there, and you'll disconnect the tube from the valve, and then you'll put this fitting onto where you took the tube off of, and then you'll connect the tube right onto here, and then you have another port right here that you can use to connect to the piece of equipment that you're trying to use here. So this is a compression fitting here. So just to show you this, remember the collar here goes right in to that area right there. So that is the sealing surface right in here, and this right in here. So this is a good example of a connection that you don't need thread tape. The sealing surface is not with the threads, it's right over in here. So putting thread tape on the threads isn't really going to do you any good, because even if you have thread tape on the threads, if you have a leak inside, the water's just going to come out right up here anyway. So again, the sealing surface is with this collar right in there and squeezed into the nut itself and around the fitting that you're using. Now, this piece of rigid tubing that I have here, I have used the compression collar right here and the nut, and this will actually go right into here as well, and it'll work just fine. So you tighten this down, the compression nut clamps down on this rigid tubing, so now you have a conversion from compression to essentially John Guest connections further on down the line, and so on. So Next, I want to show you this fitting right here. Just like this one would go into a valve, a lot of times under the counter when you're installing equipment, they will have all those regular valves, and they're 3/8 compression valves, the most common. So this is an adapter from compression to 3/8 flare on this side here. So if we can just imagine that, that this is the valve, then we put the nut on here, put the collar in there, and just tighten it down, and now we have our connection. 3/8 flare fitting. This is an adapter over to a barb fitting to use the braided line. Now, the sealing surface in this fitting, on the flare fitting, is right here. There's a beveled edge, right around in here, and if we take this out, it's right around in here. So essentially, you're tightening it down to where that surface that touches each other is your sealing surface. So again, in this case, putting thread tape around the threads is not going to do you any good, because that's not where it seals. It seals right here and right there, just like that. So what we do have is a little washer, and this washer is sort of cone shaped. So it fits into this fitting just like that, and it fits over this fitting like that. So now what we're doing is sandwiching this piece of plastic in between these two fittings, and that's going to make a nice seal. So whenever you use this type of fitting here, put the washer in there like that, then just tighten it down, and then it'll give you a really nice seal. You don't tighten it down as hard as you can. You'll feel it snugging up real nice, and that's that plastic washer squeezing. Makes a really, really nice seal. So that brings us to the barb connections. The braided hose just slides right on there, but before you slide it on, you have to put a connector over here. I like to use these. They're little hose clamps. Worm gear clamps is the name for them. And you just slide that over. You put the tube on, and then we'll go ahead and put the tube on all the way. And when you put this on, you want to leave a little bit of a gap right there, because at some point you're going to want to turn this. And if you have the braided tubing shoved right up against this nut and there's no gap, you're not going to be able to turn this nut to loosen it up. So we have a little bit of play right there, and that's going to be really important when you go to take this tube off. If it's pushed all the way up there and you don't have a gap, when you try to turn this, it's going to turn the whole tube. It's just going to be very difficult for you. So this worm gear clamp, the reason I like these is because if you have a 6-way screwdriver and you pull the bits out, and you have essentially a nut driver in here, and it fits right on there really nice. Of course, there are different size nut drivers and different size worm gear clamp screws, but most of them are this 1/4 inch drive. So loosen that up, and then just tighten it down, and you have a nice connection. The other option for this braided tubing is to use Oetiker clamps. And if you notice, this has a little raised part right here, that little square off raised, and then the rest of this is round. So essentially what you're going to do is take the Oetiker clamps. These are just like jaw pliers here. They're kind of sharp right there. You're going to grab it right there and squeeze. So I'll demonstrate. I'll just put this on the tubing. I get this turned around the right way, and grab the clamps, and we're just going to squeeze. It makes a nice tight fitting. So well, if I had this on something, it's not going to leak anymore. So the problem with using these is that now that they're crimped on there, it's kind of difficult to take them off. So sometimes you can grab like little tabs here and mess with them and grip something and try to peel it off. But you see now you can't use this anymore. So these aren't very expensive, and if you have one of these tools, then you probably have a really good supply of these anyway. But if you were to use these, then these come off really easy, of course. So pull that out, and that's that. So on a compression fitting, we don't use thread tape because the sealing surface is inside there, and the flare fitting, we don't use thread tape because the sealing surface is on the end. These are just thread to thread connections, so one threads right into another one, and you know this could be a pipe, and this could be a valve or a filter head cartridge or anything like that. But this is where this thread goes into that thread, and that is the sealing surface. So on thread to thread, that's where you use thread tape. I'm just going to show you how that's done real quick. Now, if you do it different than I do and it works, then congratulations. You don't have to do it the way I do it, but I always remember the direction that you would tighten it, that's the direction the thread needs to go. So for example, if I put this on here and I turn it clockwise to tighten, so that's the way the thread tape needs to go on the fitting. And that can get you confused if you don't have that straight, but because you try to put the fitting on and the thread tape just peels off. So I just hold it a little bit, and I get it all the way around. Now once I have it overlapped for a full revolution there, then I can kind of pull it tight. And if I pull it tight for the second round, then it gets way into the threads, then I'll just grab it and pull. And that's it. So there's thread tape, 2 layers all the way around. If you put 3 or 4 or 5 layers on, all it's going to do is start bunching up. So when you start to put it in the fitting, you're not going to get very far before the thread tape is too thick and it won't get into the threads. So in this case, I'm just going to do hand tighten, but you get the idea. 2 rows of thread tape is all you need. If you ever have a fitting that maybe this thread goes into this thread, but it doesn't fit real well, it's a little kind of loose, don't be tempted to wrap this with thread tape and just to jam it in there. It might get you 5 minutes or out the door, but it's going to leak eventually. Either the fittings are the wrong size, or maybe one's metric, one's standard, or something like that. But you see as I tighten that, I don't know how well that's showing up on camera, but it's kind of peeling away right there, sort of grinding away right there. But this is all going to seal really well. So if you have thread tape on a fitting and you do what I just did here, don't try to reuse this, just peel this off and start all over again and get some fresh thread tape on there. So that's all we have for this video. So hopefully this helped you answer 1 or 2 questions. And that's all we have for this video. Have a good day.